In 1968, the Catholic Church wrote its most draconian and oppressive document, one so bad over 80% of its own members disagree with it on.
Pope Paul has decisively dealt with the questions about birth control raised in the last few years.
The early 20th century was a tumultuous time for religion. One of the chief issues Christians were trying to figure out was birth control, something that has given pregnant people control over their own bodies, drastically improved public health outcomes, and reduced mortality rates. At the time, the Catholic Pope published a document called Humanae Vitae that was so disastrous that it shaped how the Catholic Church would navigate the world for the next 100 years and play a part in losing hundreds of millions of followers. Today we're going to be talking about why the Catholic Church is wrong on contraception. I spent years in the Catholic Church's most radical group, the Latin Mass movement, trying to earn a degree in theology and debating these issues publicly. So today I want to show you what the church teaches and why I think it's wrong. Before we get started, I want to quickly say if you think that this video is important to fighting fundamentalist Catholicism, I'd encourage you to join my Discord server for $1 a month or support my work on Patreon. Now let's get into the video. So what does the church say?
The church teaches that using birth control is a mortal sin precisely because it violates what we call in our Catholic tradition, as I'm sure you know, the natural moral law.
The official Vatican teaching is that any form, in any circumstance of birth control or contraception is a grave sin.
It only takes one mortal sin to put you in hell forever.
A sin so bad it could send you to hell for billions of years according to the documents. But this infamous teaching is rarely talked about in the modern church. In fact, almost 80% of all Catholics disagree with the church on this issue. So how does the church deal with that issue?
Whether or not the statistics are accurate about the percentage of Catholics who might use artificial contraception, the point is that's not how in the Catholic Church we decide what are the beliefs according to which we're going to try to live.
Even though the bishops of the world know the teaching is so unpopular, they still insist it's official Vatican teaching because this teaching comes, as they say, directly from God. But if you're not Catholic, why should you care about what this church teaches? They want to make it illegal for you, even if you don't believe. They don't just say their members should follow, which is bad enough, but that conservative Catholics are organizing the US to take away your rights to contraception, abortion, marriage equality, and so many other issues. But that's a different video coming soon. And if you are religious and specifically Catholic, church officials try to shame and harass you into following their rules for your body.
It's evil, it's intrinsically evil.
They call this, quote, an intrinsic evil, unquote, which means under no circumstances could this ever be justified for any reason. And many Catholics in politics have historically worked to make contraception illegal for everyone.
The Founding Fathers didn't think there was some sacred right to artificial contraception.
And this teaching is also the reason why the Vatican says that disabled couples who can't have sex in the way the Vatican says you should have sex aren't allowed to have sex at all.
I want to ask you about the morality of sexual contact when one or the other is incapable, and especially think about people that are crippled or the loss of an organ.
Your question is, if they can't perform the actual marital act, are there other sexual acts they can perform instead?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. You can have, in other words, foreplay, but if it's impossible to perform the act itself, there can be no foreplay for the act. Like, the two are not becoming one in an act like masturbation.
And this is why the Vatican says you can't even pull out during intercourse.
Don't you guys have other pretty gnarly mortal sins? Like if you have sex and you're not willing to have a baby, is that a mortal sin or am I tripping? Not contraception. Pull it out.
In the Old Testament, God struck dead by God for pulling out. It's a grave sin.
And why vasectomies aren't allowed either, even if you can't have any more kids.
A vasectomy is the deliberate mutilation of your reproductive capacities because you don't wish to exercise self-mastery over them. It is a sin, but underneath it, there's a selfishness of like, hey, we're not gonna have to worry about this anymore. We can kind of indulge in the sexual act without any of its life-giving effects.
I want to filter all of their arguments through 5 questions that are going to help us debunk every Catholic claim on contraception. 1, is this argument testable or is it just an assertion? 2, is this argument just poetry or allegory? What's the underlying argument without emotionally loaded terms? 3, even if this point were true, does it prove an absolute? Or phrased differently, could a reasonable person see it differently and legally be allowed to make a different decision? 4, if I disprove this point, would the Catholic Church change its mind? And if not, what's the more essential reason why it teaches these things? And 5th, if I don't already believe that the Catholic Church has authority from God, would this argument still stand? I've sifted through about 60 hours of Catholic videos on this topic, combined with my own experience and the arguments that I used to make to walk you through why the church thinks it's wrong. And that comes down to natural law. The religious right says that contraception should be illegal, but the peculiar thing is that the Catholic Church doesn't even point to the Bible for its teaching.
It's not a moral precept that's divinely revealed to us per se. It's something that we can know by the natural light of human reason. There's hints to it in divine revelation indeed.
They make this argument instead.
Integrity of the sexual act is a function of the coming together of its unitive and procreative dimensions. When, through a conscious choice, a couple introduces an artificial block to procreation, they're doing something which violates this integrity and thereby stands opposed to God's will. So there's the central argument of Humanae Vitae.
Natural law theory is based in its currently taught form on the outdated biological and moral views of a 13th century priest, Thomas Aquinas.
The natural law is a participation in the eternal law, or a reflection of it. And I can see it in the structures of the world. I can also sense it within my own moral self. Call it a deep sense of the basic goods. So that's why we can mount, for example, in the public forum, an argument about morality which is not sectarian, but is meant to appeal to anyone's common moral sensibility.
They point to a made-up philosophy that even non-religious people can allegedly know, so then they can claim to be not using religion to take away your rights. But they even admit that the natural law comes from their God. The next part gets dense and very philosophical, but stick with me because this is the reason why the church has oppressed women for now thousands of years.
It all comes down to the nature of a thing. So how do you know what's the nature of a thing? Well, the nature of a thing is the what it isness of a thing. How do you discover, though, the nature of a thing? Is you have to look at the what is it forness of the thing.
So this is just dry philosophy. Stay with me.
You realize it's for two things. It is for procreation and for the unity of the couple. And that's not me making something up. That's not me saying, well, that's the religious answer. It's just that's the objective answer. That's what sex is for. That's the nature of sex. Now, sex is for procreation and unity because it is, right?
This is a prime example of begging the question. They assume this philosophy vaguely held by the philosophers from thousands of years ago and just assume it's true and that you know it's true. Notice how this is just an assertion, and it's not testable. He literally says it is because it is. I can just as easily say the opposite with the same amount of evidence. We can't scientifically prove that things have natures or investigate what the purpose of a thing is. Note here, they always use the language of design and nature and purpose, words that subtly smuggle in religious language into this. We can make descriptive claims about the world, like some humans use sex to have babies, or some sex results in babies, or that sex oftentimes can lead to spouses being closer, but he is making an argument here that both of those have to be present at all times for it to really be sex. But has the church started hemorrhaging believers as people came to the conclusion that old ancient philosophy wasn't a valid reason to force pregnancy or complete abstinence? The Catholic Pope in the 1980s developed the new school of thought called Theology of the Body.
Through a series of reflections, he talked about the body in all its dimensions, and for some, it was a surprise to hear the Pope openly talk about sexuality.
Essentially, Theology of the Body is just poeticization of the same natural law philosophy. The Pope took the same outdated, unprovable, unfalsifiable, pseudoscientific reasons and gave it a flowery language and tried to show that opposing legal birth control was really just about upholding human dignity. How ironic. Here's one of the most influential thinkers in the modern Theology of the Body school of thought's description of what Theology of the Body is.
If you're new to this channel, we are all about demonstrating how our earthly bodies reveal heavenly, divine mysteries. Our bodies, John Paul II says, our bodies are prophetic. Why? What does a prophet do? A prophet is one who proclaims the truth of God.
Now keep in mind through all of this, what they're trying to prove isn't that some cases birth control can be abused, or that people can be bad, or that for health reasons some people might choose to not use a particular form. What they're trying to prove is that even if your life was in danger, you still couldn't use a condom.
The last prediction he made was that it's going to lead us to think we have total dominion over the body. This thing that we used to never be able to fully control our fertility, there was this great mystery. There's a fear of getting pregnant, which maybe kept my behavior in check. That's out the door with this pill that magically, allows for the sex without consequences, and that's a short road to now I can do whatever I want with my body.
It was made so that we could use each other for pleasure without the consequences of having babies. You're putting either a physical barrier, like a condom, between you, or you're sterilizing the act. So you're having sex, but you're basically saying, I do not, right? You're not saying, I want all of you. You're saying, I don't want all of you. I just want the part of you that gives me pleasure, and I don't want the babies for now.
And so this is an example of how Theology of the Body insists that we speak with our bodies according to this kinky divine plan. With our bodies, we say, I do or do not. Isn't actually a thing. The Catholics, and this is just a whole other rabbit hole, just look up the term marital debt, is the concept that the vows of marriage give blanket consent to sex and pregnancy at all times in a marriage. But remember, sex isn't consent to pregnancy, and consent can be withdrawn at any time regardless of marital vows. These points are all a prime example of a hypothesis theory. You make a hypothesis, you skip the testing, and just assume that it's a true theory. She's just making an assertion, and I can say just as easily the complete opposite.
To render the sexual act sterile turns us into false prophets. Blasphemy. In this sense, the contracepting husband acts a kind of anti-Christ.
In that finishing inside your partner's particular orifice is so beautiful that to finish outside of a particular orifice, or to be gay, or to use a condom even once, that turns you into an Antichrist? We'll see a lot more videos from him throughout this video, and I personally put his work into the category of sex poetry. Keep in mind question 2 of my debunking, which is this just poetry? As we watch his content, this metaphorical language used around a breeding kink is just that, metaphors, something that someone might find beautiful. But just as easily, I can say that forcing a mom of 12 who's already in poverty to be open to life and not having sex is abhorrent and not beautiful. And because of the church's historical sexism, the church actually tries to show that pregnant people not having control over their own bodies is actually empowering and so respectful.
If people had followed the church's intuition, women would be a lot more respected than they are in the current secular scene today. Man was looking very clearly into our time. A man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to a woman. As I read that now in the immediate wake of the Harvey Weinstein business, but I wonder how many have drawn the connection, as Paul prophetically did, between this casual separation of the unitive and procreative dimensions and the treatment of women as objects for the mere satisfaction of men.
Well, at least the altar boys are being treated well. Once again, he's just making an assertion. Birth control, or allowing people to have control over their own bodies and building an ethic around full consent, which, by the way, the church still teaches the marital debt. That means you can't withdraw consent in marriage. This consent-based sexual ethic actually leads to sexual predators? Talk about throwing stones in a glass house.
If it's not unitive, that would be like you saying to your partner, you know, would you please put this bag over your head? Would you please cover your head with a bag so there's no emotions here? You know, authentic sexual liberation is to work with the natural way the woman's body was created.
The Catholic Church has tried to position itself as the real champion of women's rights. That's funny because historically women have been slaves to their husbands in Catholic theology, not allowed to have any control over if they get pregnant and if they stay pregnant, forcing pregnant people into dangerous ways to save their life and autonomy.
The last prediction he made was that it's going to lead us to think we have total dominion over the body. This thing that we used to never be able to fully control our fertility, there was this great mystery. There's a fear of getting pregnant, which maybe kept my behavior in check. That's out the door with this pill that magically, allows for the sex without consequences. And that's a short road to now I can do whatever I want with my body.
It was made so that we could use each other for pleasure without the consequences of having babies. You're putting either a physical barrier, like a condom, between you, or you're sterilizing the act. So you're having sex, but you're basically saying, I do not, right? You're not saying, I want all of you. You're saying, I don't want all of you. I just want the part of you that gives me pleasure, and I don't want the babies for now.
And keep in mind that all of this language is from a cisgender male's perspective. None of this conversation is ever framed around a pregnant person having the option to choose a life-altering, life-threatening pregnancy, or that birth control and contraception can be used for more than just preventing pregnancy. It can prevent disease.
They understand to render the sexual act sterile turns the I do into an I do not.
Like all Catholics do is literally make shit up, throw a poetic lens on it. Saying I do on your wedding to marrying your spouse doesn't mean consenting to any pregnancy that your spouse wants you to have. The Catholic Church is just asserting this as a universal truth for all people. I can just as easily tell you 800 stories of Catholic women who said that Catholic men they courted just treated them as walking wombs and breeding kinks and that they have dominion over their spouse's fertility. That's not dignity. Having control is. A pregnant person being able to choose if they get pregnant or not, to be able to make choices that work for them and their potential partners, that's the real empowerment. And you can come to different conclusions about what you want to do or the reasonings behind that, but that other people should have the option as well. Catholics know that their teaching on birth control is on rocky ground with this natural law philosophy, a philosophy made up whole cloth that is internally consistent but not provable, but that they're trying to prove a universal imperative and laws in our country. They rely on scare tactics.
It just seems intuitively true that there are going to, at the very minimum, be side effects. And so when you're taking something that is suppressing a part of your body that is not effective, it's going to have an impact on your body.
It just seems intuitively is the operative term here. Natural law, theology of the body, whatever you want to call it, is creating a giant castle in the cloud supported by nothing. It's supposedly God's design for our happiness to raw dog it at all times. So then they try to use medical science to prove birth control is terrible.
If I know the pill could be harmful to my bride, okay, we're not taking it. What else is there? Like, there really doesn't need to be a debate here.
But what I want you to keep in mind here is they're not saying that a particular couple might want to take side effects into consideration. They're not saying that, oh, we should do more research and make healthier options. What they are saying with these scare tactics is that in no case For no reason should you ever be able to make the decision to weigh pros and cons yourself. Just watch this compilation of a prominent Catholic chastity speaker trying to scare you with largely fabricated facts.
They used to fumigate the woman's uterus with smoke. They would insert in the woman crocodile dung. The Depo-Provera shot is actually injected as a punishment into child molesters in the state of California now, but veterinarians don't give it to dogs. They say it's not safe for house pets. But they give it to women to Planned Parenthood. We've killed more than 25 girls so far. I grew up in a village in Africa, and the American pharmaceutical companies would come to my village, and then the women started dying. The synthetic pregnancy hormones of birth control are entering into the sewage and entering into the water treatment plant. There were trans fish, all this stuff downstream from this.
I actually want to point you to an actual OBGYN, an actual medical doctor, and not some YouTuber, to talk about the specific claims and side effects of birth control that he made. But here's the thing. Even if those things were true, they wouldn't prove the Catholic Church's position. Every medication has side effects. Chemo, blood pressure medications, life-saving surgery. It's like saying somebody died from a malaria pill once. So all malaria pills ever should be banned, even if your life is at risk, and we should just try harder to not get bitten by mosquitoes. And once again, I kid you not that this is literally the Catholic position. Even if a pregnancy would kill you, you still can't use birth control, and your neighbors shouldn't be able to choose for themselves either. It should be illegal for everybody. So he's using scare tactics on hormonal birth control, but what about basic condoms?
All right, great. I'm going to do away with all that, but the condom's fine, so let's just use that.
Yeah, inside the man's seminal fluid are dozens of biological ingredients. They're immediately absorbed into the woman's circulatory system. Your hormones are through her entire body, in her brain. Your DNA is embedding in her organs. Is deprived of this, the woman will be more than twice as likely to suffer preeclampsia during childbirth, which is an elevated blood pressure risk and very dangerous among.
So now we admit that pregnancy can be dangerous for people? He's quoting a small-scale study that showed that exposure to other person's seminal fluids helps reduce preeclampsia. Once again, we can debate the merits of that study, but here's the thing. Even if you're dirt poor, and you would go broke and be homeless if you had another baby, like you don't want a pregnancy, you still can't use a condom and are expected to just not have sex, even if that's an expression of love between you and your partners.
The pill is actually a group 1 carcinogen, cancer-causing agent, and this is like the World Health Organization declared that, right?
Yeah.
Hot dogs are in the same category. So unless we're planning on making hot dogs illegal, stop using scare tactics. So I want to point us again to point 2 that I made. Even if what these people are saying are true, which I'm not granting to begin with, does it prove that all cases should be banned? Wait until you figure out the side effects of Tylenol. If blood pressure medications but save your life, but you might lose your hair, is it worth it? If you have a life-saving surgery that might result in complications, should you still be able to do that? Yeah, there are pros and cons for everything, and we should weigh them and then come to conclusions that work for individual people.
We hear of camps in India, government mass sterilization camps. And it's really interesting because contraception was this concept of, okay, we're all gonna be free, Pope Paul VI predicted.
The whole model of a modern consent-based model of sexual morality is somehow to blame for unconsensual sterilization. Catholics love saying that Pope Paul VI predicted all of this stuff in his document. What the fuck are Catholics smoking? Once again, even if there are side effects to birth control, the Catholic Church says that proves birth control could never be allowed. There's side effects to knee surgery and heart transplants and eradicating deadly disease. That's why we weigh the pros and cons of our actions. And if the Catholic Church was arguing on those grounds of weighing pros and cons, we could have a good argument. But the Catholic Church is forcing you to focus only on the cons, say that proves it should be illegal in every country on earth, and not look at any of the pros. This stuff is ridiculous. If you want to weigh the pros and cons for yourself or with your partner, that's a great decision for you to make. And nobody's saying we should have mandatory birth control. But you cannot tell a 12-year-old victim of assault that they cannot take the Plan B to prevent being pregnant at 12. This is ludicrous. The Catholic Church also refuses to engage in real-world problems because they have this idealistic view of the world that can never change. If you think everything wasn't already crazy sounding that I was saying, let's jump into the divine conspiracy theology of birth control.
Contraception then turns sexual union from sacrament to sacrilege. It brings about degradation. It brings about degeneration. It brings about a culture of death.
Catholics refuse to engage in real-world problems because they see contraception as an intrinsic evil, and it can never be justified, even if it saved lives, even if it led to better health outcomes for the population, even if people wanted it, even if it gave people control over their own lives. According to them, this is an intrinsic evil that can never be used.
Well, I guess the premise that men and women are exactly the same and indiscernible and can substitute for one another, I guess that comes from feminism. Where does the sexual revolution come from? What was the single event? It was the advent of contraception.
Catholics blame feminism, domestic abuse, abortion, and everything they hate on one thing: contraception. We know that teaching sex ed in schools reduces teen pregnancies, but here's a priest that somehow knows better than science because God told him.
Many people say, well, Father, contraception decreases abortion. No, it actually increases abortions because of this mentality that we don't want new life. That becomes the norm.
His argument against actual studies is nah. Folks, these people are just making stuff up, denying actual data, and claiming the authority of God.
It's not a coincidence that a culture that acts like sex isn't supposed to make babies and is saturated with contraception has high abortion rates. Because contraception disconnects sex from procreation, it disconnects sex from commitment between the man and the woman, and therefore disconnects sex from love and disconnects sex from marriage. There's a reason why the nation's single largest contraceptive provider, Planned Parenthood, is also the nation's largest abortion chain. The two go hand in hand.
That was Lila Rose, an anti-abortion activist who opposes even people who were made pregnant unconsensually to be able to access abortion care, and famously opposes using contraception to reduce abortion, something you think she'd want. Instead, she points to a grand conspiracy about how practicing safe sex means more unwanted pregnancies. The church is the one saying that you can't use birth control and have to be open to being pregnant. All I'm saying is that you should be able to make the choice that works for you. And so what do we do about global issues? The AIDS crisis, STDs, overpopulation, sex slavery? Catholics can't engage with these issues historically because they can't allow condoms in any situation ever. The Catholic Pope in 2008 famously got pushback from Vatican officials for saying that a gay prostitute in Africa with AIDS might be able to respect human dignity through putting a condom on to stop AIDS, which is a no-brainer.
The church was right. Condoms are not the answer to the problem in Africa. If you have like a prostitute with HIV and a man has intercourse with her and he uses a condom, I mean, statistically, isn't he less likely for the transmission to take place? He is on one act of intercourse. But the problem is, with repeated exposures, that protection declines. If you would just abstain for 6 months between partners, the problem would resolve itself.
They grant that you could be protected from a potentially deadly disease by using a condom, but that can't be allowed because you might have unprotected sex later? And this is where I'd like to have us look at step 4. If I disprove this point, would the Catholic Church change their mind? They could admit that condoms reduce AIDS, but they still wouldn't do it. If the church wouldn't change its mind, what's the more essential reason? They don't hold their position because of weighing pros and cons and seeing that the cons outweigh the pros. Because if it was proven that contraception does good, they wouldn't change their mind, meaning that's not their essential argument. So why do they hold the position? Because God allegedly told them, and they will deny all evidence to the contrary, because the creator of the universe couldn't be contradicted by his actual creation. But when we look at the creation, we see what actually works, so they have to do mental gymnastics.
What do you say about a married couple? Maybe the man finds out he has HIV. Can't he use a condom then, or what's the solution? In order to prevent him from getting HIV, abstinence could do that. It's not as if he needs a condom to not get HIV.
Like I said, the church can't even permit condom usage in cases where someone has AIDS. They just say, don't have sex. If you're physically unable to have penetrative sex that ends in one partner finishing in the other, you can't have any form of sexual contact. Sometimes being open to life is actually a death sentence for your partner. Is that respecting human dignity? No. There's this caricature of Catholics having 800 kids, which isn't quite true, but it also kind of is. Here's what the Catholic Church says you should do if you don't want to have kids, even if it would be dangerous or financially unviable.
If contraception is immoral, according to Catholic teaching, what's a couple supposed to do? Just have 15 kids? What could they do that would not violate their wedding vows? And I'll bet you $1 million that you're doing it right now. What are you doing right now? I bet you $1 million right now you're abstaining from sex. Maybe you have a serious reason to avoid a pregnancy. If you can't abstain in those situations, your love is called into question.
I forget how creepy all of this sex poetry stuff is. First of all, he later clarifies what it means to have legitimate reasons to not have kids, something I think you should be able to choose for yourself. And conservative Catholics debate if there are even legitimate reasons to not have kids. Like, this stuff just reads like someone's trying to strawman abstinence-only sex educators, but I promise you, these are actual videos with thousands of views that Catholics look to. He's literally just saying, don't have sex.
The church isn't saying every single person's called to have 19 children, or even 10 children, or even 5 children. The church is saying...
You must be open.
Yeah, it's calling us to responsible parenthood. The thing is, you guys, contraception wasn't made to stop having children, because really there already was something. It's called abstinence.
God isn't telling you to have 15 kids. You just can't say no to the next one?
Even during a woman's fertile years, for about 2/3 of every month, the woman is naturally infertile. That's the way God made it. Modern methods of natural family planning, when you're properly trained to use them, are 98 to 99% effective in determining when a woman is fertile and when a woman is infertile.
So Catholics use natural family planning of looking at somebody's monthly ovulation to figure out fertile periods, and not having sex when one partner can become pregnant. First of all, it's not 98% effective, but even if it were, they're still saying that you can't use other methods that are even more effective at preventing pregnancy. And remember, these people are saying that you cannot be truly or sacramentally married if you don't want to have kids in the first place. Your marriage isn't approved by God if you make decisions that work for you.
People say, oh, come on. That's splitting hairs. What is the big difference between sterilizing the act of intercourse and just waiting till it's naturally infertile? What is the big difference between killing grandma and just waiting till she dies naturally? The end result is the same thing, dead grandma.
What the fuck?
If you can tell the difference between euthanasia and youth in Africa, you can tell the moral difference between contraception and natural family planning.
So this is a whole other philosophical rabbit hole. But Catholics don't believe in the ends justifying the means, except in cases of what they call the principle of double effect, which is a whole other rabbit hole. And because birth control can never be permitted, you can risk it for the biscuit and try to plan your sex lives. Remember, there must be a cream pie in every circumstance, using predictions of fertility windows. But here's the thing, even if NFP was somehow that effective, there's still health concerns in which a 2% chance of being pregnant can end in a death sentence. That's not just a whoopsie daisies of let's get a fourth job to pay for diapers. It can be life-altering or life-ending to get pregnant even with that 2% chance. And just from a marketing perspective, and this would be a whole other video, all these Catholics for the whole video have been saying that it's not great to plan your family size and you should have it be on God's timing, but then they turn around and use natural family planning as being able to plan your family size. So which is it? And here's some clips of Catholics trying to guilt trip you into making decisions about your own body. The worldview that these people have comes directly out of the Handmaid's Tale. I swear I'm not making this up.
It was made so that we could use each other for pleasure without the consequences of having babies. You're putting either a physical barrier, like a condom, between you, or you're sterilizing the act, so you're having sex, but you're basically saying, I do not, right? You're not saying, I want all of you, you're saying, I don't want all of you. I just want the part of you that gives you pleasure, and I don't want the babies for now.
Once again, every single person shown in this video essay is an approved mainstream Catholic influencer. These people are all jokes. Birth control gives you the idea that you have autonomy over yourself. You bet it does. This is literally your body, my choice rhetoric. They don't believe you should be able to contracept ever. As we look at these points, ask question number 5. If I don't already grant that the Catholic Church knows God's divine will, would these arguments hold weight? These draconian measures are antithetical to this idea even of natural law leaning towards human flourishing, because we see that people don't flourish when they're forced into pregnancy, into disease, or into life-ending circumstances. That's not human flourishing. We can use science to determine that.
We are taking the powers of life into our own hands and making ourselves like God. Wasn't that the original sin? Dear God, help us to recognize you as God, as Lord of our lives, as Lord of our fertility.
This is a sex cult, people. You're not allowed to make your own fucking decisions for your well-being. The Catholic Church wants to come into your bedroom with the force of the police, rip that condom out of your hands, even if it would save your life.
If we really want to go to heaven and be with Jesus, when we die and we meet him, we'll say, oh, Jesus, I love you. I trusted you with everything. And it's like, oh, did you trust me with the size of your family? No, I want to do contraception because I just want to have 2 kids. Oh, okay, so your convenience was easier than my will for your life, you know?
What is happening? This is actually disgusting. This guilt-tripping rhetoric is reprehensible. Imagine if somebody was sick, on their deathbed, a doctor came in to offer them antibiotics, and you said, we should just be open to God's plan for our life. But here's the thing, an alleged God would have made our brains, so let's use our actual brains to save our own lives. Because remember, the Vatican still officially says that if you make decisions for yourself, you're going to hell, potentially for forever. Talk about a cult. No wonder the vast majority of Catholics disagree with their own church. This shitty logic is why we can't have sex ed in schools, why we can't allow people to have control over when or if they're pregnant, why we can't prevent disease, why they can't fight AIDS in Africa effectively, why we can't decrease maternal death rates, why couples are shamed into never expressing their love through sex on their own terms, and why pregnant people continue to be oppressed in this world. The Vatican truly can be the most draconian, barbaric, and embarrassing institution on the face of the earth. But here's the thing, I'm not here to say that you should take the pill, or that you should always use a condom. All I'm saying is that you should have the option to make decisions about your life using data, and that you know best what's best for you. not some unmarried, celibate, sex abuse enablers in the Vatican on the other side of the world. This sex is so sacred theology of the body guy allegedly was the one covering up child abuse in the 80s. These people are hypocrites. And here's the thing, the church could technically change its mind on the matter, but they say it's God who told them to oppress you, potentially his own creation. If God exists, is he using corrupt men reading outdated books to mandate things that they know could kill or destroy you? To mandate things against your own best interest or your life? I sure hope not. I sure hope that if you believe in God, if you believe in Jesus, or even if you believe in the Catholic Church, you can throw this, just this teaching, out the window like the trash it is. Your priests, your friends, your community will never know if you decide to make decisions that work for you. Think for yourself. Use the brain that God gave you. And if you want, sing extra loud this weekend at church, because the Creator enabled you to have the ability to make decisions for you. So that's my video on why the Catholic Church, I think, does not have good reason to make this universal imperative for all people. Like I said, you can make decisions that work for you. You can look at medical science, you can talk about these things, and you can weigh the pros and cons. But I don't think the Catholic Church's absolute claim has anywhere near enough evidence to match that same imperative. If you think these videos are important to fight against right-wing extremism and fundamentalist Catholicism, I would encourage you to support this work however you can, whether that's sharing with friends or joining the Patreon to make videos like this possible. This video took upwards of 50 hours of work on my end, and that was already knowing what church teaching is, having spent years studying these documents. And I think in this new age, we need voices that know church teaching, that know how to argue with it, and can refute it. And if you want to have conversations around this topic or talk directly to me, consider supporting this work by joining my Discord for $1 a month. Thank you guys so much for watching.